When you're digging in your yard, you have to be careful. You could hit a pipe, sprinkler line, or if you're really unlucky, something much more dangerous.
In 1993, in the Spring Valley section of Washington, D.C., a construction crew was preparing to dig a trench. They're surrounded by some of the fanciest houses in D.C., the kind of place where your next-door neighbor might be a U.S. senator or an ambassador.
A backhoe operator fires up his engine and begins digging. Suddenly, the bucket on his backhoe hits something and makes a large clang. He climbs out of the machine to go down and have a closer look.
As he peers down into the hole, he's stunned. What he's hit isn't a rock, and it looks pretty alarming. It's metal and shaped like a foot-long bullet.
They are panicked, so the crew calls the fire department. When they see it, they panic and call the cops. And yes, the cops also panic, so they call the bomb squad. The bomb squad confirms that this is a real World War I mortar shell.
Concerned there could be more bombs buried nearby, the authorities carefully search the rest of the area.
They find dozens more of these mortar shells. Of course, they immediately evacuate 25 of the surrounding homes, and they call in the army to try to get a handle on the situation.
Even though these shells are old and corroded, they're still live, therefore still dangerous. So they could explode.
When the army arrives, they start carefully removing these shells, and within a few days, they've uncovered 140 of these.
However, what looks like standard ammunition hides an even deadlier secret.
These shells were not designed to kill and maim through fragmentation. It's worse than that because this site used to be home to a U.S. Army chemical weapons depot. Inside of these shells are some of the deadliest chemical compounds known to humankind.
World War I broke out in 1914, and it was the first war that started since the Industrial Revolution. A lot of new weapons were being tried out for the first time, and one of the worst of these was chemical weapons.
Highly poisonous compounds like mustard gas were loaded into shells and fired at the enemy. When they hit, they'd unleash a cloud of death. They would burn and blister flesh, destroy soldiers' lungs, cause blindness, and often they'd lead to an excruciating, painful death.
In 1917, as the United States is preparing to intervene in the First World War, it establishes a chemical weapons service in the U.S. Army. The new U.S. Army Chemical Service enters into an agreement with the new American University, and together they establish this facility called Camp Leech.
There they tested chemicals on soldiers' skin, tried out new designs of gas masks, and they developed toxic chemical compounds, loaded them into mortars, and fired them there, right on site.
But before the new weapons could be sent to the front, Germany surrendered and the war was over. Camp Leech was shut down, they dug pits in the ground, stuck the chemical weapons in, and just buried them.
At the time, the military thought these chemicals will dissipate on their own. So no one really thought much when 10 years later, 1928, the ground was turned over to developers to build what would become this ritzy neighborhood.
Now, 7 decades later, these canisters remain just as lethal as the day they were buried, making this wealthy neighborhood a dangerous minefield.
The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and several private hazardous waste disposal companies have been working to try to bring this problem under control. But the problem keeps getting bigger and bigger. They'll clean up one burial site of former World War I chemical weapons and then immediately find another one.
The Spring Valley site is about 661 acres of land, and nearly 1,600 private homes, several embassies, and American University sit atop this collection of toxic chemicals.
In the end, it takes the government nearly 30 years and $250 million to clean up the mess. They remove over 1,000 military shells filled with the deadliest chemicals and poisons man has ever developed. And yes, today they say they think they've got it all. But honestly, if I were buying a house, I'd be looking for a discount.
Next up, another war-era surprise washes up on the shores of Normandy, just in time for its close-up.
In 1961, a film crew is clearing the beaches where the historic D-Day landing site occurred in Normandy, France. They're prepping to start filming their own World War II epic film called The Longest Day, starring none other than the Duke himself, John Wayne.
But before the cameras can start rolling, the beach, which has a lot of debris on it, it's got to be cleaned up.
As they comb the sand, they uncover what at first looks like a random piece of metal. But as they begin to clear the sand away from it, it gets bigger and bigger. They at first think they've uncovered some kind of vehicle, maybe a Jeep.
They keep digging, and it becomes pretty clear that this thing, it's way bigger than a Jeep. It is a buried, full-size tank.
The film's military advisors quickly identify the machine.
It's a vintage World War II Sherman tank used by the Americans on the D-Day landing beaches 17 years earlier.
On June 6, 1944, nearly 160,000 Allied soldiers crossed the English Channel and landed on the Normandy beaches.
This was a coordinated attack along 50 miles of German-controlled and fortified coastline, and it turned out to be one of the bloodiest battles of the war.
One of the reasons that it was so difficult for Americans was because that initial wave was also supposed to include 64 Sherman tanks. The tanks were supposed to provide cover, lay down fire, and then roll over German fortifications. Unfortunately, nearly half of the tank fleet sunk in the rough waters of the English Channel before they reached Normandy.
While this particular tank was lucky enough to make it to the shore, it quickly ran into another problem.
The film's military advisors think that the tank may have broken down not long after it made it to the beach and that it was left behind during the Allied advance. Eventually, it sank into the sand where, in the end, it was covered by a dune.
But it turns out to be a fortunate find for the producers of The Longest Day. They're desperately looking for period-accurate props for the movie, so when they find the tank, they're ecstatic.
The film crew refurbishes the tank, slaps on a fresh coat of paint, and gives it a role in the D-Day sequence of the movie.
And that's how a lost, forgotten relic turned into a motion picture star.